Hello and welcome. Welcome to week 4 of our 5-week Awaken program. And this week it is all about insight. So very excited to share that with you. So I'm getting a bit of feedback. I might just mute Mona so that we don't get so much feedback. I hope that's okay. But feel free to unmute yourself at any time. And if you have any questions, that's great. Does anyone have any comments or questions before I jump into the content for this week? Oh, all right. Well, as I said, just raise a hand or jump in with a question anytime, and I will start the presentation. All right. Everyone can see that? Great. So tonight, insight on the path to awakening. Now, insight I've got here as a bit of a, sort of second header type of thing. Insight will confront your ego, and yet it brings profound joy and calmness to your awareness. So I've spoken at great length about how in meditation we want to try to quieten the mind and yet sink into a state which is aware but not talking about things. It's aware, everything just is, but it's not talking about things. It's not making stories. And the thing that makes the stories, which is our mind, we can also, and the story itself, I guess, we can call the ego. So what is the ego? It's really this idea that we have when we say ourself, whatever picture that is the ego. And so if we say we are a important person, then when we get contraindications of that, when someone tells us, you're not very important, or we feel not very important, then the ego really suffers. If the ego believes that they are an honest person, then you worry about doing something dishonest. If your ego says, so the ego manifests, and the ego is always searching for happiness, and it searches for happiness in accumulating things, in accumulating friends and relationships, in pleasure. The ego loves pleasure, and being famous, that sort of thing. And unfortunately, also, that grasping and clinging to all of those things that the ego does has the other flip side of it, that when those things don't happen, the ego suffers, and that is what we call suffering. Awareness has none of those things, because awareness is just as it is. And when we relax into awareness, we feel calm, and there's a natural state of joy that begins to arise. So the insight shows how illusory the ego really is. And of course, the ego does not like it when it is attacked or shown to not exist or not be important. And therefore, it reacts sometimes with anger, sometimes with frustration, often with fear. So often insight teachings will elicit a fear response. Now, if you get a fear response from anything that we're going to talk about tonight, that is the ego feeling worried, feeling fear that it might not exist. And the thing is, it's true, it doesn't really. It's an illusion. If there's any sort of joy in what I speak to you tonight about, or calmness, if you feel a sense of relaxation, then that is the awareness recognizing the truth of how things are. All right, so that's my introduction, and then we're going to move on to um, uh, this illusion. So, what is the ego? As I've said, it is whatever I define myself as. And yet, when we ask ourselves, what is it? What is the myself referring to? We can contemplate that for a long time, and it's actually not, it's a little bit confusing. Like, what is myself? Now, the first thing I will say is that this idea, this ego or this myself, it varies throughout the day. Sometimes this feeling of myself is very, very strong. And at other times, it's much more relaxed and you're not thinking so much about myself. And just to get a feeling or an understanding of this, one of the times in which the myself, me, manifests in its strongest is when we are being blamed. If someone is blaming us or we feel blamed and we feel hurt, at that point, it's like, you dare accuse me of X, Y, Z? How dare you? I am not at fault. I am not at blame. And at, at those times, the sense of myself becomes very, very strong. Now, you might want to compare this to other times when perhaps you're walking in nature or you're sitting calmly, not thinking about too much, relaxing, and then you'll feel the difference. The myself doesn't feel so rigid and strong anymore. So this this is what I wanted to do to give you a sense of what it is that insight is trying to erode and get rid of, is this sense of myself. So this was the key. Just let me see if I did this on the other slide. Yeah, so maybe as an introduction, this of course is primarily a Buddhist thing. Although that's not true really. The Hindus and many religions, actually, if you look deep in all traditions, they there are parts of every tradition which talks about this. But I think the Buddhist tradition actually, yeah, talks about it most explicitly in this thing called selflessness. And it is actually really, in some respects, it's the key that defines Buddhism in a way from all other religions. So, just as a historical little story, the Buddha uh, got an insight into, if you know the Buddha's story, he left his castle where everything was perfect, and he saw old age, sickness, and death. And then he came back to the castle and he asked his father, what is this old age, sickness, and death? He said, well, it's true. We all suffer from old age. We eventually will all suffer from old age, sickness, and death. And the Buddhist said, what, even me? Like, even me, even here? And the father was trying to protect him from that and said, yes, even you. And at that point, he got very disillusioned and decided to take up the spiritual life. So he went out and he found monks and he went to two particular teachers. And one teacher taught him to meditate very, very deeply. And the other teacher taught him to meditate even deeper, up to what we call the eighth jhana. But still, um, even though he could get into these deep states, he still hadn't found the answer. And because up till that time, and even Hinduism today believes that the answer is to become one with God, one with God. So there's still very, very subtly this idea that there is something to be one with something else, one with, you know, whatever their God is, Brahma or whatever. And it was then that he went off and meditated by himself for 6 years and came across this realization that there is no self. And that was really the seed which started Buddhism in a way. So this is the classical, this is more of the sort of classical teachings. They are still probably the most powerful teachings in the world to bring about insight. Although in the Finders course that we did last week, the meditations are somewhat different, but are also very, very powerful at sinking into, uh, I would say, earlier stages of awakening. Whereas these ones, to sort of these teachings bring about the sort of they hold nothing back, and then they sort of go the whole way. They are the anyway. They are the classical teachings. So what are they? So uh, in Buddhism, in the various sects of Buddhism, they say we're going to once you learn to meditate, we'll give you certain meditations to contemplate on, which will trigger the mind into this state which we call awakening. The first is searching for this unfindable self. Now, there are two kind of ways in which we discover, I guess, emptiness and selflessness. The first is an analytical way where we use the mind to beat the mind. So it's the mind that created the self. And what we do is we give this intelligent mind, this very, very smart, intelligent mind, a job to do, which is to find exactly what it means by the self. Go and say, okay, search for yourself. Now, the Buddha helped in the sense that he said, well, when I do a search, and I suggest when you do a search, you'll find 5 heaps of things which could be the self. He says, first of all, there's this physical body, you know, the cells, the blood, the flesh, or whatever. That's one heap. They call it a heap form. Also in Pali, it's called rupa, or in Sanskrit. The second is sensations. So also in, as well as a heap of flesh, there are a heap of 5 different sensations. Sorry. Let's go to perceptions first. So samadja. So there are 5 different perceptions: sight, sound, feeling, taste, smell. And there's that heap of things. And then there is these feelings like I like this, I don't like that. Okay, that's called Vedana or sensations. I like this, I don't like this, and I don't care this, I don't care this way or that way. So it's positive, negative, or neutral. Next, he says, if you look carefully, there's thought patterns, there's mental formations, there's beliefs, there's values. And then finally, there's actual knowing itself, consciousness itself. We are consciousness. So the Buddha said that, granted, I give you that there are these 5 things that exist in the place you call you. But given that, tell me which one of those are, when you refer to myself, are you referring to all of them, some of them, none of them, something separate, you know? And so we do this search in the 5 aggregates and we use our thinking mind. We say, okay, mind, you're a sharp piece of work. You're really knowledgeable. You've been referring to this self for a long time. Now tell me exactly what is it? Where is it? And apart, accordingly, this meditation, if you sort of do it long enough, you don't ever get an answer. And it's by searching and never finding an answer that it dawns on you that this thing we call a self is a made up illusion, a story which we use in place of something that is going through life. So this was Buddha's, you know, initial suggestion. Then a few centuries later, a very famous guy called Chandrakirti, who was an abbot of a very big monastery, Nalanda Monastery, um, was considered the king of logic and debating. So in the Buddhist traditions, they had a tradition of debating. You say, where is the self? I debate with you. Is it here? Is it there? No, it's not here and it's not there. So they would debate each other as a form of fun and a kind of to stimulate the mind and to get the mind thinking and to try to analyze every different direction to see if you could find a self. And so he came up with sort of what he believed was a very good logical debate for people to use to try to prove to themselves that the self doesn't exist. And he said, practice finding a chariot. He used the chariot as the example. Practice finding the chariot in the chariot. Is the chariot in the wheel? Well, no, that wheel is just it's not really a chariot, so it's not in the part. Anyway, you try to find it in the parts, and when you can't find a chariot, then you apply the same thing to the self. So uh, his he came up with 6 different perspectives that people commonly think of when they think about the self. So if we take the body, we can say, okay, is the self in the body? Now, is the self the same as the parts? Is it all the parts together? Yeah. But he would debate that, well, if it was all the parts, then if you chopped off a hand, then you would no longer be self. And if you chopped off a leg, you would no longer be self. And so that proves from our logical mind that we're not the same as our parts. So number one, we tick off, no, or cross off. Okay, that's not that. Well, therefore, if the self is not in any of the parts, it must be separate to the parts. Okay. And he said, well, if it's separate to the parts, then where is it? And a lot of people say that, oh, it's your soul, oh, your soul, it's your soul is you. But where is the soul? No one's ever found it. No one can point to it. No one can, it's just a made up idea, a soul. So if you can't find a self that is separate from the parts, then how can we actually say that our self is separate from our parts? So then that leads us on to the third one, the Chandrakirti, and I'll go through these fairly quickly. That the self depends on the part, like a house with rooms. Okay, a house depends on the fact that it has rooms, but it itself has a separate identity. So yeah, well, we are not the parts, but we depend on the parts. But then you sort of run into this, well, this thing that depends on the parts, is it in the parts or is it separate to the parts? And you contemplate that from long enough and you see that that just does not make sense. How can a self depend on the parts? And he says, well, look at it like the parts depend on the self. So there's like a life force that gathers these aggregates together. But again, the longer you spend meditating on whether this is true or not, eventually you have to conclude that that just does not make sense either. And then his final two are self as a collection or self possesses the parts. And these are all just fine distinctions of how one might view the self, how it exists. And then we can do that with each of the five aggregates. So we can do that with body, with feelings, with perceptions, with consciousness and mental formations. And eventually we decide, after much exhaustive looking, that we cannot find a self. And it may kind of elicit this idea of insight, which the ego doesn't like, but it actually brings about a state of deep peacefulness to the awareness. All right, and here's Nigel. So welcome, Nigel. Um, so this is one type of meditation that we could use to use the mind to kind of get past the mind. And it's really good for intellectual people like myself and maybe some of you that don't want to quite give up the mind yet, but you can almost use the mind to negate itself, which is a very smart, skillful way to be able to uh, work towards the mind realizing that there's no self. Alrighty. The next one, the next three are again from the Buddha, and they are his foundations, and they are impermanence, suffering, and no self. They're called the three characteristics. It's said that everything in the universe has these three characteristics. Now, these are more, you also have to think about them, but these are more, you don't think too much about them. It's more sinking in. So, in day one, I talked about the two methods of sinking in and then getting rid of views which don't really help, or, wrong views. And these also, we try to get rid of wrong views, but we also, when we get a feeling of everything is impermanent, we try to sink into it. Yeah, so that's that one. So the first of these is impermanence. We know that everything is changing all the time. We are certainly changing and getting older. Kids grow up. Our house always seems to go wrong and needs fixing. So things are changing all the time. And even solid things like the wall over there, if you look at it at a atomic level, it's buzzing and changing, and even though it looks solid to us, it's actually moving all the time. So everything just moves. So nothing is the same as it was just a second ago. However, how do we sort of sink into this idea of impermanence? Well, one way, which is quite profound, which I'm sure you've done, is when you contemplate the size of the universe or the size of time. Think about all the time that has passed from the beginning of the universe up till our birth. It's supposedly 7 billion years. It's an enormous amount of time, enormous amount of time. And then think of all the time that will pass after our death. It will be at least 7 billion years, maybe much, much longer. We don't know whether the universe will ever come to an end. It could go on forever. And then in comparison, think about our life. What a small flash it is in the length of the universe, that our entire life is just but the tiniest, tiniest little, nanometer of time compared to the the amount of time in the universe. Feeling, some people might feel a bit queasy thinking about that, as I said. But the idea is just to sink into that and just get a feeling where the mind begins to stop. It can't fathom anymore. And, fall into that sense of just bare awareness. So think about not only our lifetime, but just this moment, how short that is, and how every moment things are changing. So that's one way which I've put here for you to contemplate and use this idea of impermanence to allow yourself to still the mind and absorb and sink into this state of awareness. Another way is to just you know, always be looking out for the impermanence of everything and say to yourself, that's changing, that's changing, that's changing. The Pali word is anicca. So if you don't want to say, oh, that's impermanent or that's changing, you can actually use the Pali word or the Sanskrit word, sorry, anicca, anicca, anicca. That's another way of practicing this awareness in impermanence. The other thing is to use, I've said here, the heart's rhythms or the way your mind moves during the day. One moment it's tired, the next minute it's got more energy, then it's feeling good, then it's feeling bad, then it's feeling frustrated, then it's feeling peaceful. You'll notice that from a sort of an internal perspective, mind is also impermanent. And if we can stay aware of that, that's also a good object to see impermanence and to gain insight on. And finally, I find that sound meditation is a great way of hearing impermanence because sound inevitably changes. Sound is always changing. Just the ringing of a bell, ding, eventually it's going to go. And even within sound, if you listen carefully, you can hear the waves of the sound. You can hear that even within a single sound, which sounds like, say, your refrigerator going, vroom, it's made up of lots of little sounds, which are all impermanent. So these are some practices that we will, if we work together, we might try these and see if these elicit a way of stopping the mind and allowing you to drop into the peace of impermanence. Okay, any questions so far on ways to create insight in our mind? Nigel,
Sorry, I'm late, guys. I've written 11:30 in my diary, not 11. So my mistake.
no worries.
Um, if I can have the recording, you're recording this, be grateful. Thanks.
I'm recording it and it'll all go in that drive folder. I've already sent you the link. So,
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
alrighty. So now the next one is interesting one. It's in Sanskrit, it's dukkha, which means the nature of suffering. So Buddhists will say everything is suffering. The whole world is suffering. And so it's like, well, that's a very pessimistic way to look at the world. Everything is suffering. Um, but and if there wasn't a way out, it would be pessimistic. There'd be no point in saying that really and convincing people if it wasn't a gateway to something. But contemplating this deeply is a gateway to what we call non-clinging, and that in turn is a gateway to happiness and joy. So there is rhyme and reason in trying to understand that all conditioned phenomena are suffering. And dukkha is, in a way, a natural extension or a follow on from anicca, which is impermanence. in that if everything is changing and if everything is fleeting, then it's pointless to crave and cling to things. And whenever we want something, if we know that it's going to disappear, it's just so pointless. It's like, why would you want to grasp something that you absolutely know is going to disappear? You know, I want to be beautiful. I really want to be beautiful. What is the point? What really is the point? You cannot keep beauty, even even when you go to bed at night. And then how beautifully you are dressed up the evening before, you're going to look a bit of a sight in the morning once you've had a sleep. You know, everything changes all the time. So really, uh, you know, there's no point in craving and clinging. And that in itself brings a sense of peace. So Dukkha follows, and it follows on that if everything is impermanent, of course one is going to, of course everything is suffering if you cling to it, because it's a natural law. If we cling to something as solid that is not solid, we can't help but suffer. It's just a natural thing. So, uh, the realization of dukkha creates this thing called renunciation. Now, renunciation from a Western point of view is like giving up all your possessions, going and eating rice, living in a nunnery or a monastery or living in a cave, renouncing everything. And that's true. And even in the East, people do that. But the real renunciation is just giving up the clinging for stuff. And so it's like I'm still going to live in a house, but to cling to this house as if it's going to be here forever is no point. Yeah. To cling to you guys as students and hope that you will be around forever and ever and be listening to my webinars. It's just not realistic. It's not going to happen. So why? There's no point in getting upset when things change. So there's a sense of renunciation. I actually I don't want to cling anymore. I don't want those things that I've used to grasp because they're just suffering. People naturally get to this, you know. Um, people, you'll see people after something for years of their life. And then finally, when they're in their 50s or 60s, they go, I've been chasing this my whole life. I'm just sick of it. I'm just not going to do it anymore. And then they just let it go and they finally find peace. So dukkha is the second characteristic that the Buddha says that if you meditate on this, it will cause a sense of peace in you. So how do we meditate on dukkha? Well, there's that, by the way, I've listed 4 ways, for example, here, but there's many more. Same with impermanence. I'm just giving you a taste here on this. The first of all is to really recognize it. Now, clinging is recognized as this kind of push-pull thing in our mind. It's a sort of a metaphor, but we can feel ourselves going, oh, I want this, I want this. There's this pull. Or if we've got something we don't like, we can feel our mind kind of turning away and pushing it away. And if you meditate on things that you crave, you'll feel this push-pull. Now, if you can relax this kind of push-pull of the mind, you'll find that you'll go into a state of just equanimity and relaxation. And when it's there, you'll feel yourself suffering. What I like to describe it as is a kind of contraction. I can feel almost as if my body is contracting a little bit when I've got craving in my mind. And then when I haven't, I can feel this letting go of expansion. And of course, the feeling is very different. It feels so much nicer to be in expansion. Now, it's very true that craving does have a physical effect. It will actually cause the body to contract. And if you can notice that conjunction or that, you know, um, yeah, the way that the mind and the body are connected, then you can actually feel it in your body and deliberately relax your body. And funnily enough, that will reduce the craving in your mind. So you can do this at a physical level. So that's number two, because the mind and body are interconnected. The next is interestingly, even though impermanence leads to suffering, the good thing is that suffering as well is impermanent. So this is the good thing about impermanence is it's not only the good things that everything is impermanent, suffering itself is impermanent. And by actually contemplating that, by going, I've got this suffering. Now, is it fixed? Is it stable? No, it's changing too. I can feel myself craving a little bit more, a little bit less. It's changing too. So thinking about the impermanence of dukkha can be a way to work with dukkha. And finally, this sense of equanimity, of trying to be totally welcoming everything. So going as far as to say, you know, if dukkha comes, if suffering comes, I'm going to change my attitude and I'm going to welcome it because I know it's impermanent. I know that if I feel it, it'll go as soon as I felt it. So this is another therapy based on this is acceptance and commitment therapy. So there are four ways to work with dukkha, which are all very powerful ways to elicit a relaxation response by contemplating this idea of craving causing dukkha. And the more we actually feel pacified when we let go, the more confidence we have to let go of more and more and more and more. So it kind of success in one area helps you let go more and go deeper and deeper into this state by letting go more and more suffering. Okay, and then the third one, some could say the ultimate teaching, is this sense of anatta, which is selflessness. So impermanence leads to dukkha, and then the final one is selflessness, which in a way we talked about with Chandrakirti and his chariot. But we can do it more directly as well by actually just reminding ourselves that not me, not mine. So one of the mantras you could say is not me and not mine. The other thing about self is we tend to sort of believe that, this is my cup. This is my all my possessions, my shirt, my phone. And we kind of extend ourselves into our possessions. But when we remind ourselves it's not mine, okay, and this is not me, um, those ideas start to loosen. We can sort of contemplate the body and say, start with the fingernails. Is this me? No, not me, not mine. Yeah, not me, not mine. You can actually, if you search your body, sometimes you find things on your body which you didn't know was there, like a fold of skin or a freckle or something like that. And you go, wow, I never knew that was there. And it can elicit a very odd feeling that, wow, this body is not me because I didn't even know that little freckle was there. How bizarre is that? It's quite funny ways when you contemplate your body and things like that to suddenly realize the body's not me. It's an organism that is just living by itself. Same with feelings and thoughts. We can describe these as well. That's not my thought, not my feeling. It's just arising due to causes and conditions. And even perceptions and even intentions. Intentions are a very, very deeply connected thing to You know, of course, if I have an intention to give a class, that's me. But really, that intention came through causes and conditions as well. There's no me behind the creation of intentions. And then consciousness itself, which is a very, very difficult one, but ultimately we can see that even consciousness itself is just causes and conditions. So that's anatta. And this leads us to the practice of what they call the second emptiness, which is to see that things are not things. So this cup is not a cup. It's only me labeling it a cup, which then turns it into a cup. And if I take away the label, then what is there in the outside world? There is nothing, because everything depends on a perceiver. Everything depends on a labeler. And so this is a deeper state of awareness where you realize not only is there no me in this thing that is the aggregates, but there's no aggregates themselves, and there's no external things. So all of this stuff, you know, people can take many months to study, and indeed it's worth taking that time to study this, because these four plus others are what they call insight meditations, which can trigger an awakening experience. And they can do it any time. You know, perhaps one of you tonight, as you're thinking about this, will suddenly be triggered into letting go of something deep and strongly held by you by thinking about these things. And you'll have a mini awakening. It can happen to anyone at any time, but it usually doesn't. So these teachings in themselves, for the average person, often don't trigger an insight experience. Instead, we need to create a good basis for these insights to have the power to make changes to our mind. And in particular, we need to have them supported by the other four keys, which I'm talking about throughout these weeks, which is a good meditation practice, a lot of what we call purification through coaching or therapy to get rid of the more extraneous ways in which we hold things, knowing the locations of sinking in and not being afraid to go into those states. And then finally, open-heartedness, which I haven't talked about yet, which will be the subject of next week's talk. So, whilst insight could be said to be really the most powerful and probably in a way the most important part of the awakening process, by itself, it rarely has an impact on people unless it's supported by other supports, which are the four keys which I've talked about in other weeks. So that's why we do them all together. So in conclusion, tonight I've touched on four of the most powerful and traditional contemplations that have been passed down to us over 2,500 years, which, if penetrated deeply with our mind, can trigger what we call an insight experience leading to awakening. But these are generally only really powerful in the presence of the four other keys which we've talked about. So that is the end of my presentation. So I will switch off the presentation, and this will be recorded and you'll have access to this. But please let me know if you have any questions or clarifications on what we've talked about tonight.
Hey, I think the thing I keep getting stuck on is, I'm not stuck on, but I can't make, anyway, I'll just say it and then decide what it is. where does motivation come from if you have insight and like I kind of understand it a little bit. Like when I'm reading something about it or listening to something about it, I'm like, oh, that makes perfect sense, but I can't keep it in my body enough or my mind enough or wherever enough to then away from that piece of information to be able to describe it to myself or other people. Like, am I making sense or am I rambling?
So where does the motivation come to keep up the practice, or where does the motivation come once you've succeeded in awakening? I'm guessing it's that first one. Is
Yeah,
that
should be spending more time with insight and you could have more moments of insight and you're letting more and more things go. Because I don't know, I guess it's because we live in a culture where we're just surrounded constantly by messages to succeed and drive and strive and defeat and conquer. And that's predominantly the only message we've received for how to achieve things in life.
yes?
Um,
Well, I agree, and that's why, in the thousands of years that this knowledge has been available, there still have only been a handful of people that have reached awakening. I mean, we could count them. I would guess they're in maybe the tens of thousands, possibly even more than that. But even that, considering there's 7 billion people on Earth, is just a tiny, tiny fraction. And it is very, very rare that people will keep the motivation to pursue this to the point where they start awakening, because the ego is just so, so strong. We have to either be very curious and very determined and very keen to pursue this. There has to be some real strong strength in us to pursue this, to say, no, I want this more than anything else. Or we have to suffer really, really badly. So the two people that tend to do this is people who have gone through an enormous amount of suffering. They've lost loved
Mm.
ones. They've been diagnosed with, life-threatening illnesses, and they've got nothing left to live for. And then they're given this teaching and said, well, there is actually an answer. You can transcend all of that and find happiness irrespective of your life's suffering. Those people are quite motivated. Or there are people who just hear this and somehow they resonate, they're curious, they're willing to just put this as one of the highest priorities in their life. But it is not for most people. 99% of people will hear this and go, yeah, that sounds good, but that's too hard. I'd prefer just to go down the beach. And they convince themselves that is how they find joy. By the ego is very strong. It's got a very, very powerful argument. I don't know. There is no, if someone found the answer to that question, then we'd be living in a very peaceful world with many, many awakened people. But we're not. We're living in a very aggressive world where violence rules, selfishness rules, greed, hatred. And the irony is, it's hurting the people who are espousing this hatred and greed as much as the people that are victims of it as well. But it's it's just that's the way we live, I guess. I don't have a good answer, I guess at the end of the day is my answer.
when I think about it, I think, well, do I have the courage to surrender? Like, do I have enough trust in that there's insufficiency or the universe or whatever it is I'm calling it this week, depending on what I've read and what I've been thinking about. Do I have enough trust to surrender? Do I have the guts to do it? And so it's kind of one of those chicken and the egg, like what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Like, do you surrender and then find the trust, or do you have enough trust and then surrender, or is it both?
Yeah, that's the irony is craving. In order to get the joy, you have to give up craving. But craving itself says, no, 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 don't give it up, because this is how I get happiness. And so you've got to be willing to have that trust and go, I'm just going to give up those things that I normally turn to deliver me happiness and see what happens. Yeah, it's but you can't have the happiness without the trust. That's not quite true, because if you learn meditation and you learn to do deep meditation, you can already get deep feelings of bliss and happiness still while you're clinging, and that'll give you more trust. So there is a journey. You can gradually get it, but it's not easy. There's a certain catch-22 where you've got to sort of give things up before you get the good stuff first. And you've got, like you said, you've got to have that trust.
Stuff's impermanent too, right? So then that feeling of contentment then just that ends, because that's not permanent either. So I guess you've just got to keep the machine.
Well, right. I mean, you've got to see the sense of it, because if you get what you want, it makes you happy for a little while, and then you want more, you know? If I won $100,000, I get it, great. But then suddenly I want $1,000,000. Then when I've got 1,000,000, I want 10 million, etc. But and once you see that rat race, that cycle, enough times, you go, this is ridiculous. I just can't be happy, because my mind will always grasp for more. It's the same with me.
About that, but I need more time to think on them to formulate them without sounding like a raving lunatic.
No, I mean, those questions are coming from deep within, and yeah, I think we all people struggle with these ideas, and it's good to bring them out. No, I mean, I'm fine with you asking half-formed questions. We can form them. That's good.
Yeah.
Oh, go on, Lisa.
I guess the other one I wonder, and whether this is still, related to the motivation thing or not, but is there still a sense of service? But if you think about Indigenous societies, for example, their life was lived in service to the environment that they lived in. You would, based on what we know and the romantic visions we have of those Indigenous communities, there was a fair amount of awakening, awakened people in those environments. So would there, I guess, if there's still an element of service, I guess, or is that just another craving? I don't know.
Yeah, my view is that there is a sense of service, but not in the way you currently see service. So service is more in flow with the universe. Like once you've found happiness and you've found awakening, you don't have to do anything. You can just sit there and eat rice for the rest of your life until you die, and you'll be quite happy. But you can also go out and help people, and you'll be equally as happy. You won't be any happier, but you'll be equally as happy. And it just makes sense to most people that, well, if I've still got 20, 30 years of life left, it makes sense to see if I could share this with others. And I might only share it with 2 or 3 people, or I might become famous and share it with hundreds of thousands. But I myself can't be any happier whether I am out teaching people or not teaching people. I personally don't have motivation in that regard, but it makes sense that the universe is flowing from a state of suffering to a state of wellness, and I might as well contribute to that flowering of wellness with other people. So there is service. I would say most enlightened people, but not all, certainly not all. But a lot of enlightened people will just go out and start helping others in whatever way they can anyway, because to them it really doesn't matter one way or the other. So they might as well be helpful. And so in the Indigenous culture, they would live life in service to their environment because it was just the way. It's just the natural thing to do, not out of any sense of well, if they're awakened, not out of any sense of duty or I must do this type of thing.
Custodianship.
Yeah.
Thanks, Pat. I'll ruminate some more and see if I've got clearer questions next week.
Good time. Alrighty. So I know, Nigel, you did have your hand up, but it's got
No, I just wanted to add quickly though, just to Lisa's comments, and we said it before. The fact that we are here right now doing this session means that we have got some kind of that word. I don't like that word craving, but that word anyway. We are searching. We're looking for something that hopefully will be better for us.
Yeah, there's an irony that actually we're craving enlightenment, and it's in fact that craving which causes the motivation for us to get there. So there's that paradox as well, that without craving is the thing we're trying to get rid of, and yet without it, maybe
we wouldn't exactly.
we wouldn't do it. So the whole kind of comes together, doesn't it? It all just sort of spins together. Even the very worst thing is we still need it.
Yep, great, thank you.
Okay, Mona, Mandy, Catherine, Kylie, anyone else got any questions?
Yep.
All right, well, thank you for listening in. And yeah, it's great to see you all again. And I shall go and give my voice a little bit of rest for tomorrow. And we will see you again next week, next Thursday at the same time.
Okay.
So
11 o'clock, not 11:30, Nigel Goodwin.
That's correct, Nigel.
Thank you. Thanks, Peter.
All right.
Thank you.